I'm Michelle Sassooni.
And I'm Jake Hoffman.
And this is Moderately Outraged, the show by young conservatives where each week we discuss the topics that are making young conservatives a little bit angry. Typically, our show would run about 15 minutes, but this week we had a very special guest.
Yeah, we actually got to sit down with Roger Stone for about 45 minutes and do a full interview, not just about his ongoing legal case, which is very much in the national spotlight, but his overall legacy and the impact he's had on the American political system. So I hope you enjoy it. And while we're watching, I hope you guys can comment and share and like and do all of those things, because as we premiere these live on Facebook each week, we enjoy being able to converse with you in the comments and have that discussion. So enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I really appreciate you taking the time for the interview today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. As I'm sure you know, I'm a former Young Republican National Federation chairman from 1977 to 1979. I was active in both college Republicans and Young Republicans. I think it was probably one of the most important formative experiences in my life. Most people don't realize this, but the convention rules that are used to elect the Young Republican National Chairman are identical to the rules that are used to nominate the Republican candidate for president. And therefore, if you are experienced with the YRNF rules, you know how National Republican Convention politics works. This is actually why Donald Trump reached out to Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was my campaign manager when I ran for Young Republican National Chairman, which was kind of a shock because he had been elected national auditor, and I was not a national office holder. He was supposed to be the candidate. I was supposed to manage his campaign. But then he decided in 1976 to support Gerald Ford, who had been appointed vice president and became president upon Nixon's resignation, while I was supporting the challenge to Gerald Ford by Governor Ronald Reagan. Reagan supporters greatly outnumbered Ford supporters within the YRNF. Rather than break up the conservative faction of the organization, we switched places. I ran for chairman, Manafort managed my campaign, and I won. It was a great experience. Manafort is a great convention manager. I was very pleased to see that they allowed him out of prison. I stress once again, if it needs to be said, the crimes for which he was convicted were all reviewed 15 years ago, and they decided there was insufficient evidence to prosecute him. They were only dusted off and brought forward because of his support for Donald Trump, and no crime that he is accused of or convicted of had anything whatsoever to do with the 2016 election or Donald Trump. Right now, I pray for him and his family. His health is not good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to go back to, one of the things that we actually had this on our website probably for the past 5 years of the Tampa Bay Young Republicans, a quote from you that says, traditionally, young Republicans have been a leading indicator of the direction of the party. And that goes a lot to what you were just saying when you took your, your chairman position, that there was a split in the party. Do you still feel that way, that your opinion is that this organization is the direction that the party is headed?
No, there's no question. So in 1979, I was the Reagan candidate for national chairman. That foreshadowed the nomination of Ronald Reagan a year later. In 1963, former Congressman Buzz Lukens was elected national chairman. That foreshadowed the nomination of Barry Goldwater in 1964. Generally speaking, the preceding YRNF election has usually laid the groundwork, kind of let you know where the party was headed in terms of its nominees for president. There are a few interruptions in that pattern, but generally speaking, the enthusiasms at the grassroots of the party, particularly among its younger activists, eventually take hold of the entire party. We saw this with Donald Trump. Donald Trump had very little support among establishment, what I like to call country club Republicans, but he was able to reassemble the coalition that really began under Richard Nixon and came to full bloom under Ronald Reagan. That would be Southern Democrats, conservative Democrats, blue-collar, working-class Union Catholics in the Northeast and the Midwest, along with traditional small business Republicans. That was a winning combination. If you look at the failed candidacies of John McCain or the failed candidacy of Mitt Romney, it's not the Republican areas where they underperform. It's in the working class, blue collar Democratic areas where Donald Trump just does 5% better than they did. And that 5%, or whatever it may be, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Florida, that makes all the difference. Trump has Trump speaks to the working class voter in a way that the others did not. Mitt Romney is the snobby elite. And John McCain was a lunatic, as we now know, deeply involved in the efforts to run an illegal coup to take down Donald Trump, feeding what he knew was fabricated information to the FBI.
Roger, do you think that the young Republicans that you talk to and that you're involved with, that Trumpism, for lack of a better term, and his politics is the direction you see the party going into the future? Or, from my personal observations of the young Republicans, I see that we tend to have a little bit more of a libertarian view, which is something that you've expressed yourself. And that, so down the line, I'm curious to what you see. Where do you see the direction of the party headed? And do you think the Republican Party needs to alter its messaging and its platform a little bit to, again, go a little bit more towards some of the things that Trump has advocated for, or again, like more libertarian, a little bit more socially liberal, which is what I tend to see on the younger front?
I guess what I think is that the party will now head in a populist direction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see us returning to being the country club party of the Bushes, where the party is viewed as exclusive. We clearly, under Donald Trump, have the opportunity to make greater inroads among African American and Hispanic voters, mostly based on a great economic record. Now, how coronavirus affects that remains to be seen. I am one who believes that if Trump knew how to revive our economy once, he certainly knows how to do it again. We also know whatever it was Barack Obama was doing wasn't working. We had the weakest economic comeback in the country's history. In terms of, I do think the party will have to become somewhat more libertarian on some social issues. In his Second Chance Act reforms, where people who were sent to prison for under harsh mandatory penalties for the first time nonviolent crime of possession of small amounts of drugs, a policy which has been an ignominious racist failure, started by Richard Nixon, his biggest single mistake, in my opinion. It isn't reforming anyone's lives. It's not rehabilitating anyone. It is ruining families. From a conservative's point of view, the taxpayers are paying billions to incarcerate people who are not violent and not dangerous. And it falls disproportionately on poor people and on Black people. It is an enormous mistake. Now, let's look at the historical record. While it's true that Richard Nixon began the war on drugs, it was Joe Biden and Bill Clinton who turbocharged it. Nixon never had mandatory penalties. Under Nixon's drug policies, judges had discretion. If a housewife was found with a quarter of an ounce of marijuana in her purse and she had no previous criminal record, but she had 3 kids to feed, the judge could give her probation. But under the Biden-Clinton 1994 crime bill rules, which Joe Biden used to proudly call the Biden bill, judges have no discretion. So this is an area where I'd like to see the president continue the judicial reform that he began under the Second Chance Act.
Absolutely. And now looking back at your career over the past 40 or 50 years, you've worked under so many different presidents and under so many different presidential campaigns. What would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned from Nixon, Reagan, and then Trump?
I guess it would be that discipline is 9/10 of politics. In any presidential campaign or in any campaign for any office, the candidate that dominates the dialogue will always win. Politics is about being interesting, about being provocative, about engaging the voters in a way that is entertaining to them. Politics and show business have a huge amount in common in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
You, as a candidate, decide to play it safe, take no strong positions on the theory that if you offend no one, you will get more votes, well, the voters will find you boring. The only thing in politics worse than being wrong is to be boring. If you are boring the voters, they will begin to look elsewhere. So politics is a business for risk takers who are willing to put forward big ideas and defend them and sell them. Your job is to force your opponent to talk about what you want to talk about. I guess that's the most important lesson I've learned from all of the candidates I've worked for, presidential, and U.S. Senate, and gubernatorial, and so on. Beyond that, our politics has changed dramatically, and it has also not changed dramatically. It's changed in terms of the technology. So it used to be if you wanted to run for Congress in a suburban district in a major media market, the only efficient way to communicate with all of the voters was broadcast TV, and therefore you had to be able to raise $4, $5, $6, $10 million to run for the House. Today, with the ability to reach the people on a targeted basis through the internet, one can actually run an efficient and possibly
absolutely
Congress on $250,000. Now, Facebook is trying to take that ability away from us by restricting our use of political advertising.
Yeah,
So,
I worry about our interview here, Roger. I've already, it's one of those things. I know that you've already seen it. Probably, I would say that you and Alex Jones have been at the forefront of that fight, right? Not just Facebook, but PayPal and all of these other larger conglomerates that have kind of come together.
And Laura Loomer, who's running a courageous and very good campaign for Congress in the district next to mine here in Florida.
Yeah.
These people fear the truth. You see, they feel that if everyone speaks and the voters are allowed to decide, that's dangerous. They don't believe in the power of their own ideas. They just believe in silencing us. And it's going to be a problem before the president before it's over.
And do you see a clear path on how to fix that issue of social media censorship?
Very, 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 very simple. Attorney General Bill Barr goes to Facebook and says, I am charging you with violation of the antitrust laws. We'll be at your office to pick you up in handcuffs shortly. Don't go anywhere. That's how. This is a clear violation. The First Amendment arguments have not worked in court. So bringing a First Amendment action against Facebook or Twitter will not work. But they are clearly violating antitrust laws, unfair competition laws. The Justice Department needs to act. We've had hearings. Matt Gaetz has been very good on this subject.
Mm-hmm.
I sat and watched Jerry Nadler say the idea that Google manipulates its search function to disadvantage conservatives and Republicans is a right-wing conspiracy theory. No, Jerry, it's the huge contributions you've taken from Google in which they pay you to lie, like you just did. It's really extraordinary. I sat there in the House Judiciary Committee hearings, and I heard the chairman of Google say, China? We don't do business in China. I couldn't even find it on a map. I don't know anything about China.
Yeah.
Fire.
Well, now speaking about lobbying, going back to the 80s with Black, Manafort, and Stone, you essentially invented modern day lobbying. And now a lot of people would say that lobbying, PACs, super PACs, and dark money in politics is essentially what is wrong with the American political system. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, first of all, the idea that we invented lobbying is completely false. The lobbying industry was invented by Democrats under Franklin Roosevelt. Here's the difference. The Democrats, like the late Tommy Boggs, who was the son of Congressman Hale Boggs, both good men, would go out and bundle money legally and give it to a congressman or a senator, and that's how they would buy their access. At Black, Manafort, and Stone, we went out and worked for candidates. We helped them get elected rather than giving them cash. We might make some nominal contributions. That was the substantial difference. To say that dark money grows out of the McCain-Feingold law and the subsequent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court in the Dave Bossie's organization, the name escapes me at the moment, a Citizens United decision. So there was dark money at the time that I was involved actively in federal politics. You had PACs that could accept $5,000. You had individual candidacies that could accept $1,000. You could have no coordination between the two of them. Obviously, at $5,000 a chunk, it is easier to raise money for a PAC. The PAC had to use their own common sense, their own polling, their own observations to figure out the themes that they would advertise for in order to help the candidates they were seeking to elect. It is only after McCain-Feingold and after the Citizens United decision that you have the dark money problem. When it comes to dark money, we're amateurs. George Soros is the master of dark money. Dark money is being used disproportionately on the left, and there's a concerted effort to buy district attorneys and state's attorneys in rural areas and in states across the country.
And do you think that, this kind of leads us into our next question, and you can relate it to your case or just in general here, but do you think that the criminal justice system is distorted by politics?
I think the criminal justice system is very badly corrupted, but I don't think it's corrupted by political money. I think it is corrupted by ideology. Essentially, the problem we have is the majority of the people working at the U.S. Justice Department, until recently, a majority of the people sitting on the bench were liberal Democrats. The greatest single mistake that the president, and he probably agree with this, was the appointment of Jeff Sessions, who left all the Obama dirty cops in place. The guy who led the prosecution of me, Jonathan Kravis, who tries to pass himself off as a non-political career prosecutor, was associate counsel to Barack Obama in the Obama White House and has a long record of abuse of power. Look at his prosecution of the 3 young aides to Congressman Ron Paul. He violated all of their civil rights. He certainly violated my civil rights, and more importantly, he defrauded the court in my trial, claiming things that were not true regarding the alleged hacking of the DNC by the Russians, for which there is no evidence whatsoever, none. But we're going to fight that out in an appropriate court down the road. But that is a giant problem, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would you suggest to combat the deep state and restore faith in the American institutions of the justice system?
Well, one man has begun doing that already. His name is Rick Grinnell. The president ordered the declassification of these documents that we got last week 2 years ago. And bureaucrats and deep staters were dragging their feet or just disobeying a presidential order. One courageous man with knowledge has dumped the truth on the American people, and he's going to dump more. You have to clean house. You cannot, there's an old Italian saying, it's actually a Sicilian saying, a fish rots from the head. You can't just take off the head of the fish and leave the rest of the fish. You had to clean house. Why is Bruce Orr still working at the FBI? Why is he still there? Why isn't he sitting in jail? It didn't take 3 years for the Democrats to stage 2 completely phony efforts to impeach the president. Why is it taking 3 years to clean house and prosecute Brennan and Clapper and Comey and others who very clearly violated the law? I was charged with lying to Congress. Mueller lied to Congress. Comey lied to Congress. Brennan lied to Congress. Clapper lied to Congress. Strzok lied to Congress. Page lied to Congress. Rosenstein lied to Congress. They all lied about material things, substantial things, yet none of them have been prosecuted.
Do you think I know you've said this before, you think that this is more of, maybe the prosecution getting back at you for things that they, accuse you of in the past, and not necessarily the crimes that you're, currently alleged of?
There's no question about that. I'm being punished for exposing Bill and Hillary Clinton in my book, the Clintons' War on Women, which is still the go-to source for the epic and incredible corruption of Bill and Hillary Clinton and Hillary's daughter, Chelsea. The fact that the chief prosecutor inside the Mueller investigation was formerly the lawyer for the Clinton Foundation, and the chief prosecutor after the Mueller investigation was deputy counselor to Hillary Clinton at the State Department, I think tells you the story. I was being prosecuted by my political opponents. In what system would that be considered fair? Would that not be considered a conflict? But the real reason I was prosecuted was because they thought they could pressure me into turning on Donald Trump and testifying falsely regarding the content of some 29 phone calls I had between candidate Trump and myself in 2016. And I refused to do that because it wasn't true. Never once did we discuss Russia or WikiLeaks or anything related to it. That I can tell you. I can't remember the content of all 29 calls, but I do know what we never discussed. And that was never proven otherwise at my trial. They use this great sleight of hand. So, this is a politically motivated prosecution. They brought the charges against me more than a year before they knew there was no Russian collusion. They arrested me in this crazy, over-the-top raid on my home at 6 a.m. where 29 heavily armed, SWAT team-clad FBI agents stormed my home like I'm some kind of drug kingpin. I felt like Tony Montoya in Scarface. It was a joke. They were arresting me for a white-collar process crime, which I was not guilty of, and I'm still not guilty of. I'll either prove it on appeal, but I will ultimately prove it. And they spent $1.1 million on 17 armored vehicles, a helicopter, amphibious units, a K9 unit, this giant battering ram that they pulled up to my front door. What for? They spoke to my lawyer the day before. All they had to do was say, we're charging your client, bring him in and so you can surrender. And I would have. Instead, we had to put on this media circus for CNN. There is no question whatsoever that CNN, who arrived and set up their camera tripod 14 minutes before the FBI arrived, was tipped in advance. Their claim that this was just a journalistic hunch is BS.
Absolutely.
And leaking the execution of a search warrant, what they did, is a felony. Why does Christopher Wray refuse to turn over the email records between CNN and the FBI in the days and weeks before my arrest? Which team is he on, by the way?
Well, and speaking about those political teams, how do you think that we can implement more checks and balances so that we don't have people who are, your political opponents prosecuting you in a court of law?
Well, first of all, I think the president's made great strides by appointing a record number of conservative judges who believe in the Constitution and the law. That's the first step. Secondarily, you need to clean house in the Justice Department and the intelligence agencies, and frankly, the Pentagon. Under Barack Obama, generals and admirals who were conservatives or Republicans were retired, and the only people who were elevated were globalists. That is a problem as well. I respect our fighting men and women more than anyone else, but at the upper levels of our military, you have a disproportionate number of Obama Democrats.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's just look at your career as a whole. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I believe something that Richard Nixon said. A man is not finished when he's defeated. He's only finished when he quits. The greatness does not come when things go well. The greatness comes when you are tested, when you take some knocks, when you suffer defeats, but you get back up on your feet. Only until you have been in the deepest valley can you appreciate the majesty of the highest mountaintop. So the tattoo of Richard Nixon that is on my back which I'm not going to show you. My wife would kill me. It's not a political statement. It's a reminder every day that when you suffer defeats, when you are discouraged, when you want to quit, you have to get back up on your feet and get in the fight. The story of Richard Nixon is a story of resilience. It's a story of persistence. It's a story of never quitting and never giving up. It's an American story. And I would like to be remembered as someone who, along those lines, I could have easily flipped on Donald Trump and avoided being broke, the stress on my family, the possibility of a long-term prison sentence. It would have been very easy just to lie, but I refused to do it. That's how I want to be remembered.
Absolutely. And so to kind of piggyback off of that, now, your legacy as an individual is one thing, but, again, we hit on a little bit about the effect that, Black Manafort and Stone has had on the American political system. What do you think that the lasting legacy of, your work during those 40 or 50 years is going to be on the American political system?
Well, the problem with that, of course, is that history is written by the winners. During this entire ordeal that I have been through, in virtually every media outlet, you will see me described as a self-described dirty trickster. I have never, not even once, described myself that way. Press have described me that way. I have admitted that I'm stuck with it. It'll probably be on my tombstone, but I have never called myself that. And I've always made it clear that I was prepared to do anything and everything necessary to elect my candidate, short of breaking the law. And I have lived by that. My prosecution is a fraud. It's a joke. And those who are trying to write my epitaph, they may be a little premature, I assure you.
Yep, I would probably agree with that. And so do you think that, you touched a little bit on some of the policy that's been out there on, that's created the lobbying monster that we have out there in the American political system, like McCain, Feingold, those types of acts. Are there any changes you'd like to see, when you're no longer involved in politics anymore? Are there things that you think that would help the American political system after you're gone?
Well, I do believe that money is speech, and therefore I think limits on contributions are wrong. Taxpayer-financed campaigns, that's tyranny, as Thomas Jefferson described it. Forcing a man to use his money to support causes he doesn't believe in is tyranny. Mm-hmm. What I do think is we need a far more sophisticated system of transparency. So as soon as an individual gives money to a U.S. senator, it is immediately available for everybody to see. That, I think, is the greatest single reform I'd like to see in our politics. The evolution of political communicating away from broadcast television is a great positive, because it means the average person can now raise enough to be a viable candidate for office, when before, like Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey or Herb Kohl of Wisconsin, only millionaires and billionaires could buy a seat in the U.S. Senate to cap off their career. The internet censorship issue is probably the single most important issue in the country in terms of the future of Trumpism and the future of a more populist, working class friendly Republican Party.
Yeah. And I would say that's probably why Democrats are so heavily against, regulating some of the, and coming down and opening up free internet and free speech on the internet, and, allowing people to disagree openly on, these types of platforms. Our show, we do okay, right? Like maybe we'll hopefully get between 50,000 and 100,000 views on this show, going through BizPac Review, which I think is excellent for people just starting out as young Republicans. But what, at a larger scale, as you start to get into the millions of views, I do worry for the success of the things that we're doing, because of the fact that if they're going to get pushed down, I already see it, at a low level. And I know that you guys have seen it at a higher level with what Alex Jones has gone through.
2016 was the year in which the mainstream media lost their stranglehold on the political narrative. 2016 was the time that power was shifted to the people, and the rise of a vibrant, robust alternative media on the internet is the only thing that allowed for the election of a Donald Trump. It gave him a platform to punch back. Now the corporate left has figured out the internet was a mistake, and they want to stick the toothpaste back in the tube. And they want to do that through censorship. Donald Trump has the power to stop this today. He needs to have his attorney general act. It's not that complicated.
And then to follow up with that, what are you seeing around the world? I mean, America is one place, but the internet obviously has opened up communication to groups that in news that have never seen it before, or never, only got state-run news. To the Chinese, obviously try to censor as much as they possibly can to their citizens. Where do you eventually see? Do you see a revolution at some point for people that are pushing for free internet, that are pushing for free information around the world?
There's no question that with more information comes more freedom. This is why the Chinese are so aggressive in cracking down on access to information, and Google, who should be ashamed of themselves, are helping the Chinese communists keep this oppressive system that abuses their people, that actually kills people for the purposes of harvesting their organs and selling them because they disagree with their religious beliefs. Google should be ashamed of themselves. They have put profit ahead of principle. They sit there before Congress and say that, oh, we're not doing business in China. It's really disgraceful, and it is, and it will come here. Everything is up for grabs in 2020. If the two-party duopoly of elites that drove this country to the brink of disaster are able to recapture the White House, then it's over for constitutional freedom in this country. You can already see where we were headed. Donald Trump has been the most consequential president in my lifetime. And that's not easy to say because I was born under Dwight Eisenhower, who gave us unprecedented peace and prosperity. Richard Nixon, who ended the war in Vietnam, reached a strategic arms limitation with the Soviets, opened the door to China, gave us the 18-year-old vote, ended the military draft, desegregated the public schools, saved Israel unilaterally in the 1973 war, launched the war on cancer. Ronald Reagan, who restored our military strength and the respect for America around the world and reignited an economic boom in this country. And Donald Trump, who has built our economy to the strongest point in our entire history, where unemployment was at the lowest levels it has ever been among all Americans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, where wage growth was at the fastest pace ever, where billions of dollars were coming back into the country to be invested here, to expand businesses here, to create jobs here. All of this having been undone by a virus imported to us by the Chinese. By the way, it's a Chinese virus. But I have every confidence that if Trump knew how to rebuild the economy once, he knows how to do it again. I have huge confidence in President Trump and in Larry Kudlow to refire America's recovery. They'll do it, but we need to get reelected. And that's going to be a much tougher fight than people think.
And well, hitting on as you said, the Chinese coronavirus, with the fact that after the virus occurred, so much we realized that our manufacturing being overseas in China was a great hindrance on the American prosperity. And that's something that Donald Trump has been saying since, he began running. Do you think that finally now more people in the government will start listening and will start moving those manufacturing jobs back to the United States so that something like this doesn't happen again?
I think they're going to be required to. I think the government, our lawmakers, have the ability to force them to, and it's for our own good to do so. No, the Bushes and the Clintons actively worked to ship our manufacturing base to China in return for lining their pockets. And Donald Trump has to reverse that. We should not have to rely on the Chinese for medicine. We should not have to rely on the Chinese for medical supplies or steel or anything else. The point, of course, is that while the Democrats were jumping around saying Russia, 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 the greatest single threat to America is not Russia, it's China. I'm not suggesting that the Russians are good guys or that we should embrace them, but at least we have in common the fact that we're both at war with Islamic terrorism. The Chinese they manipulate our currency, they steal our intellectual property, they cheat in every trade deal you have, and now they ship you deadly viruses that kill your economy.
We also just, the last article we published on BizPac Review is about how we actually probably they are doing a genocide, but I think that they're additionally hiding a little bit more of the genocide, under the guise of COVID and some of the deaths that are going to come out and some of those numbers. I think that, history is still yet to write that story.
And the fact that so many liberals are sitting there defending China and you have the WHO praising China for how they've handled the virus while they have 1 million people in concentration camps, it just shows how blinded so much of the world is by their desire to not be seen as racist, while Donald Trump is willing to sit there and call it like it is and say, look, it's a Chinese virus.
When we're talking about the government, we're talking about the country, not necessarily people.
They bought their control at the World Health Organization. Mm-hmm. There's just no question about that. They worked very hard to insert the leadership there who has been willing to lie on their behalf. Their conduct in this entire thing has been secretive and manipulative, and Trump has had the courage to call them out. It has nothing to do with racism. We don't hate the Chinese people. We don't hate Chinese Americans. We don't blame either one of them. It is the Communist Party leadership that we have problems with. The people
absolutely.
Their own people. And to call us racist because we correctly identified the virus as coming from China is not a condemnation of the Chinese people. That's a political stunt, just like calling us racists. But Barack Obama was president and he had a Democratic Congress. How come he didn't give a second chance to all these poor people and black people sitting in prisons, serving mandatory sentences for nonviolent drug crimes? Why didn't he do anything about it? He had a chance. He did nothing. Who came along and brought justice? Sure, I'll give Kim Kardashian credit and Jared Kushner credit. They deserve credit for bringing this issue to the forefront. But Donald Trump's the one who gave people justice. Barack Obama had his chance. He was going to close Guantanamo. He was going to bring all of our troops back from Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. And he turned out to be just another puppet for the deep state, and the policies of George W. Bush and the policies of Barack Obama were and are identical on trade, on immigration, on foreign policy, and the pursuit of endless foreign wars with no purpose. Donald Trump is an outsider. He is his own man. He is not managed. He is not handled. He is not manipulated. He thinks for himself. Nobody tells Donald Trump what to do, what to think, who to talk to, what to write, or what to say. And the American people find that extraordinarily refreshing.
Yeah, I would totally.
I was late, and I'm going to have to cut this short because I have a dentist's appointment, and they're hard to get in South Florida.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I really appreciate the time that you gave us today. I think that there's a lot of really interesting points that you brought up. I really, again, wish you the best of luck with what you're doing. I hope justice is served ultimately. And that, again, that we could speak again at some point, maybe get you to a Young Republicans convention.
I would love to do that. For those who want to help me, you could go sign the petition to President Trump at freerogerstone.com. More than 750,000 people have now signed. If you want to help me in my epic fight against the deep state, you can go to stonedefensefund.com. And I hate to say this, but if you want to put gasoline in the tank of my car or groceries on the Stone family table, you can go to stonefamilysupportfund.com. Any help at this point will be deeply appreciated, but nothing is appreciated as much as your prayers. Thank you, and God bless you.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Roger. Really appreciate it.
Again, I'm Michelle Sassooni.
And I'm Jake Hoffman.
And if this episode made you moderately outraged, make sure you share it and tell us how you feel in the comments.
Yeah, and a special thank you to BizPac Review, Conservative News Today, for having us on their platform. Again, we'll come to you every single week with great content like this, and we hope you enjoy it.